talk about my final review. Now, currently, I am level 100, done Uber Durio, all the bosses, except Uber Lilith, already done Nightmare Dungeon tiers. I'm working on finishing the last season here. I'm on like tier 92 or something of the Nightmare Dungeons. So I haven't done tier 100 of the Nightmare Dungeons, and I haven't done Uber Lilith, but I've done everything else in the game so far on hardcore, have farmed a lot of equipment. In fact, if we look at the stash here, you can see I've got just about anything I'm going to need. I just cleaned down my stash. Got way too many of these Dolmen stones. By the way, really cool. And we also farmed the new ring today, the new Malignant ring from Varshan as well, and tested that out. So, and I've maxed all my vampire powers out at this point, so I've done pretty good amount of the things there is to do. So first and foremost, I want to say, let's walk through the mechanics of Season 2 and how I feel about them now that I've used them a while. Let's talk about the new bosses, and then let's sort of talk a little bit about Season 3, because I have a point I want to make there. So first thing first, vampire powers. I feel slightly better about the vampire powers playing the game a little bit more. Before, I was thinking they're a little bit like passive, uninteractive, and a little bit boring. I feel mildly still this way, though as you develop your builds more and more, it becomes easier and easier to figure out which of these you're going to slot in depending upon which build you're going to use. And I do find myself, for the most part, just using the same 5. But there are some powers in here that are pretty cool that you can actually kind of swap in depending upon what kind of build you're doing. And I have enjoyed the vampire powers, though I will say this is not the focus of the season for me. For the most bit, this is something that I leveled and then set and more or less forgot about, and then I only really mix them around if I'm changing my build. So they're all right. I think the vampire powers are like a 6 out of 10. They're not a reason to come back to the game, but they are cool to enjoy during that time. I also want to talk about real quick here this new Malignant Heart, bringing the new Malignant Heart from Season 1 in. I hope they do something similar with these vampire powers. We bring some of the ones people like Hemomancy is a good example of one that everyone likes, or Ravenous. You know, I'm using Blood Boil, but it really depends upon what you like. Bring some of these back in another way, similar than they did to the Season 1 mechanic, would actually be pretty cool, and I could see them building upon that. Now, Uber Durio being added in the game was a great addition. And after having done it, I will say 2 things about it. One is I enjoy the ability to know that I can get 925 item power gear, and that's pretty much what I've enjoyed about him the most. And the odd dopamine chance and Uber unique. No, I have not got one yet. I've killed him about a dozen times. I need to kill him significantly more times if I actually want to get an Uber unique. But number 2 is he's way easier than you're thinking. So you can actually beat him like a level 90 with poison resist. I beat him at 93 on hardcore with a bad build that wasn't min-max remotely. Paragon glyphs weren't leveled, all of that stuff. Was still able to beat him, just slopped on a poison resistance potion and had at him. Not a big problem. In fact, he's easy enough that I saw a barbarian literally one-shot him and ball lightning tears right through him. And when I was using the Boulder build, I was able to kill him fairly quickly as well myself. So he's not really like something you super have to continually push towards. No, by the time you get to him and by the time you have materials, you'll probably be able to beat him with most of the builds, which feels all right. Because of this and the Blood Helltides mixing into Varshan, which you do these Blood Helltides, which gives you a whole bunch of whispers, and you level off this Blood Helltides, which I actually like this quite a bit, and you need to do this anywhere for the vampire powers. This is where you then go to the Tree of Whispers, because you were doing your whispers from doing the Blood Tides. You do Varshan, which also gives you the new ring, which then gives you the half of the materials you need for Durio. And then the annoying part happens, which is you need these shards of agony, and they call them that because of the agony you're in from having to farm the living steel in order to summon them. You only get this from the 300 tinders from wherever the cinders here, from wherever the Helltide spawns. You'll go do those, you'll get your cinders, from the Helltide, you'll put them into the box, that's 300 points, you get 3 of the living steels out of there, and it takes 5 of the living steels to summon this, meaning you have to do 2 boxes for 1 of him, and each time you kill him, he basically only drops 1 shard of agony, though I have heard he can drop 2 of these, and for this reason, you basically have to do 1,200 of these cinders, which takes more or less forever farming, and that is the pain point. So what I find myself doing is not really wanting to farm a whole bunch of Uber Durio, because I don't really want to run around the Helltide when I'm already leveled and just kill things over and over again just to get the living steel. I have more Forgotten Souls than I would know what to do with at this point, and so that part can get a little repetitive in the in-game. Because of this, what this really makes me realize is that Uber Durio is a good stopgap measure to stop people from quitting at like level 70. So season 1, when the game came out, you would hit just about level 70. And then what would happen is you would be like, okay, I hit level 70. I've experienced the mechanic of the season has to offer, which is the Malignant Hearts, almost immediately. In season 1, you would get right into it and you would immediately have the Malignant Hearts, which would be you would get the mechanics out of the way and you would feel like the season's over like really early, because yes, there are some hearts you would get later in the game, but for the most part, you've tried these hearts out, you know what the mechanic is, and then that's basically the whole season. And so for that reason, season 1 felt like you're pretty much over it, like level 50, 70, right around that area. People were starting to get bored more. Now with season 2, because of these 5 new bosses, this Hell Tides farming these to go, Varshan, etc. And then not only do we have the Halls of Pentient, but we also have the Glacial Fissure, which is the ice boss. We have the Darkened Path or the Darkened Way, which is where you're going to do Lord Zir, the vampire lord boss, etc. Because of these and the more unique item chases, now what happens is up to level 100, and I say up to because I want to talk about level 100 posts, is you actually don't really feel that pressure of being like super bored or it's just grinding and repetitive yet until post 100. So now what happens is you get in the game, you experience a new mechanic, then you have the Blood Tides, then you have a new boss to do, then you have a different boss to do, and then you mix it up with some Nightmare Dungeons and you do some Hell Tides because you're starting to get to the point of doing the Uber Durio, and then you do Uber Durio and you're like, that was great, I want to do another Uber Durio, and you farm like 5 Uber Durios, and right about the time you start farming Uber Durios and farming everything else, you're going to hit level 100. So I think a lot more people are going to be getting into the level 80s, 90s, and yes, even level 100 in this season, because the amount of things to do up to in-game, and I say up to because we're going to talk about in-game in just a second, the amount of things that you're going to do getting up into in-game is actually significantly better going into season 2. I'd say it's like flipping a light switch, light and dark. It's very opposite to season 1. Season 1 would be boring very quickly. Season 2, now you have a reason to continue to level. So because of all these bosses, mechanics, etc. So I actually feel like what they basically did was were able to move the point in which the audience retention would fall off a cliff all the way sort of until the 90s, high 80s, right around there. And then people may be starting to, bleed out when the audience retention starts to fall off a little bit. But it is significantly better than it was in season 1. And now when you're level 100 is when you start feeling like you were in level 50 and 70 in season 1, because you start farming for Uber Durio. So now when you're 100, really the only thing there is to do is push Nightmare Dungeons. You can push the Nightmare Dungeons because you need to build a 90 anyway, or be the 90 anyway, in order to be able to continue to push your season objectives. And it's that or Uber Lilith, and people will probably choose to do the Nightmare Dungeons instead of Uber Lilith, especially if you're hardcore, for instance. So people are going to push those, and those will give you the drops for the Glacial Fissure, but you don't really need those, do you? What you really need is the Uber Durio, and so people are going to either farm the Nightmare Dungeons just for get your Paragon Glyphs up, etc. But then at some point, they're going to hit the level 100, not need to push Nightmare Dungeons anymore. You've already got your 90 and all that for the season journey, let's say. And then what's left now is the Hell Tide farming. So which really comes down to Living Steel. So Living Steel is the real new pain point, farm point in this game, that it becomes repetitive of you farming over and over and over again, because Varshan is easier to farm the materials you need. Like trying to get the materials, these femurs, these heads, these trembling hands are a lot easier, for instance, than farming for Living Steel, because you can actually get Malignant Hearts in some of these materials also from doing all sorts of things. There will be these little monsters that will pop up out of the ground, and they can drop a Malignant Heart, they can drop a Trembling Hand, etc. And if you're going to be doing the Blood Tides, you actually get bonus kills. Every now and then you'll have one of these monsters pop up also from doing different events and what have you. And those will also have Malignant Hearts, femurs, etc. in them. Whereas the Hell Tide doesn't have it, where when you kill one of the Hell Tide monsters, it might just drop you a Living Steel. You have to get the 300 cinders, and you have to farm it over and over again. Basically, what I'm saying is because of this, the bottleneck becomes the Hall of Pentient if you wish to redo Uber Durio over and over again, which is really what the current game has to offer in terms of repetitive content. So because of that, the repetition and the point that will bore people and grind people out is currently Living Steel. Now, they did address this, however, with one of the Q&A sections of the Campfire chat, in which they mentioned that Living Steel They are looking to add more ways to add living steel into the game because this has been a pain point and concern for people, that this is something that they are recognizing. So hopefully we do see more living steels come into the game. And we also know that because of this image right here that they showed us during their chat on stage, that the Nightmare Dungeons are not going to be the end-all, be-all content in terms of difficulty as well. We actually have this, which triggers after you beat the Seasons Chapter Journey. And the Seasons Chapter Journey, like I was showing you prior, requires you to do a Nightmare Tier 90 or higher dungeon. Now, they also mentioned that the difficulty of these dungeons are going to be ramped way, way higher, meaning that if you beat the 90, you might go into the tier 1 of these new sort of dungeon sigils, and you might instantly get killed, for instance. So if you're playing hardcore, you're going to be careful of that gap of difficulty as well. So effectively, I think it's something like this. I think season 1 that we didn't really have much of a mid-game. We had an early game, but we didn't really have much of a mid-game. Now season 2 with Uber Durio and these 5 new bosses, that is not really a complete in-game in my opinion, but it gives you more of a mid-game. I say it's a mid-game because there are things you do up until level 100. And then, yes, you can continue the farm for your Uber Unique. You can try to get the dopamine real quick drop of it. But Uber Durio farming is not a satisfying enough in-game that will keep people in the game past level 100, just continually in a mass market appeal. So I think that's where, when they start adding in these new things, like they show this with the graph, with these new dungeons, for instance, I think this is where we start getting into more of the end game. And they also show this, the gauntlet mode with the leaderboard going into season 3. So season 1 was more of an early game. Season 2, they added mid game. Season 3, hopefully they're adding in game. And it might end up being sort of what I was saying way back when the game launched. So right around season 3 is when we actually start getting more of the full, complete, polished picture. At least that's what's starting to round up to be. So for me, my review of season 2 is this. Season 2 was a massively well done implementation of a mid game, meaning this is not a complete full game yet, but season 2 had massive improvements over season 1 in terms of content added, has massive improvements of the mid-game section of Diablo, because I think we are actually missing a good chunk of mid-game as well as in-game. And by season 3, hopefully, we're going to be seeing this in-game content. Now, the other part of it is season 2 is not over. This is actually being added in December, which is part of season 2 and is the first addition to a real actual in-game cycle, one of many, hopefully, that will be added to the game. So season 2 is actually going to be adding some in-game as well. But if you're asking me, I think what season 2 executed really well upon was keeping people entertained up until level 100, whereas we were losing people continually by level 100 in the previous season, as well as the launch of the game. For me, season 2 additions were actually quite good. I think they made the game significantly better. If you're asking overall rating of the game right now, I think it improved it by a full point. If you thought the game was a 6 before, maybe now it's a 7 for you. If you thought it was a 7, maybe now it's an 8, okay? If you think the game, however, was a 2 when you played it in season 1, I think it's still only going to be a 3, maybe a 3.5 for you. The reason is it's not completed yet. Like I say, I think we still need another season worth of content to really wrap the game around. But I do think that season 2 added what is, in my opinion, a full point worth of value in terms of a 1 to 10 ranking of the game. I actually think it was a quite well done season. And if every season we get as much additional content as we receive this season, because I see people saying the season 2 didn't have a lot of content, but I disagree. We got the vampire powers, we got the blood tide, we got 5 new bosses. We're getting this whole new edition as well here with this graph they're showing us that's coming as well this season. We have the mid-season event. I actually think we got a pretty good amount of stuff in season 2. So if season 3 delivers on that same quantity of new content that comes into the game at a much more hyper focus on the in-game, by season 3 we could actually have a pretty decent in-game, or at least that's one man opinion. Anyway, I'm live every day at 11 a.m. Pacific at twitch.tv/DarthMicrotransaction. Maybe come on by tomorrow and talk about it if you have your own opinion. That's about it. I love you all. Thanks for liking, subscribing, and all that YouTube stuff, and I'll see you on the next one.